If you've ever been made to feel small, invisible, or foolish, then you know what I'm talking about. If you've ever had your own family look at you with that awful mixture of pity and contempt, then you and I have something in common. They think the story's over. They think you're in the epilogue of your own life. My name is Philip. I'm 68 years old, and my children thought my story was over. They were wrong. This isn't just a story about getting my money back. It's a story about taking back my self-respect from everyone who tried to steal it. And if you've ever dreamed of doing the same, then stick around. Because you're about to find out what happens when you try to swindle a spook. It began, as these things often do, with a whisper of hope wrapped in a blanket of sophisticated lies. The man called himself Julien Dubois. He had a smooth, vaguely European accent that could have been from anywhere, and therefore seemed to be from everywhere. He found me on a LinkedIn group for retired financial professionals, a place I frequented more out of habit than necessity. He wasn't a connection, he was a comment, an articulate and insightful observation on a post about renewable energy bonds. I responded, he replied, and soon we were in a private message exchange. He was charming, intelligent, and he spoke a language I understood, the language of calculated risk and projected returns. He told me he managed a boutique private equity fund based out of Switzerland, specializing in emerging green technologies in Europe. His signature project was a cutting-edge solar hydro plant in a remote region of Portugal. The returns, he assured me, were phenomenal, and more importantly, stable. Guaranteed, even. That should have been the first red flag, of course. In my world, the only guarantee is that there are no guarantees. But I was retired. My world wasn't what it used to be. My wife, Martha, had been gone for 3 years, and the silence in the house was a physical presence. The market had been volatile, and the steady, predictable dividends from my conservative portfolio felt uninspired. Julian offered something more than just a return on investment. He offered engagement. He offered a project I could follow, charts I could analyze, a purpose for the sharp parts of my mind that were beginning to feel dull from disuse. So I took the bait. I started small, a test balloon of $10,000. He set me up with a login to a sleek, impressive-looking online portal. I watched my investment blossom. Within 2 weeks it showed a 7% gain. I could see the daily reports, the fabricated progress updates from the site in Portugal. It was all so professional, so transparent. After a month, I cashed out a small portion of the profit, a test of my own. The money appeared in my account within 48 hours. The hook was set. Over the next 2 months, Julian cultivated me like a prize orchid. We had weekly phone calls. He'd ask about Martha, and I'd tell him stories. He'd listen, offering quiet, respectful condolences. He was a master. He never pushed, he led. He would talk about the next phase of the project, the big institutional investors coming on board, and how the early private investors like me stood to make a fortune. The big ask came on a Tuesday. A major construction phase was beginning, and they needed a final injection of capital. A $270,000 investment, he explained, would secure me a premium stake. The projected payout in 18 months was nearly triple that. He wasn't just selling a stock, he was selling a dream. The dream of telling my children their old man still had a few tricks up his sleeve. The dream of securing not just my future, but theirs. The dream of turning the quiet hum of my retirement into a roar. I did my due diligence. I searched the company name. It existed. I looked up the address in Zurich. It was a real building. I transferred the money. $270,000. A lifetime of careful saving, of foregoing vacations, of driving the same car for 10 years. It was the biggest financial risk I had ever taken. For 48 hours I was euphoric. I checked the portal. My new enormous balance was reflected there, shining on the screen. Then, on Friday morning, I went to log in. The page wouldn't load. 404 not found. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, began to pool in my stomach. I tried again. Nothing. I called Julian's number. It went straight to a clipped automated message. The number you have dialed is not in service. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands started to shake. I sat there, in my study, staring at the blank screen, the silence of the house suddenly deafening. The money was gone, all of it. Julian Dubois had never existed. The solar hydro plant in Portugal was a phantom, and I, Philip Norton, a man who once briefed generals on matters of national security, had been played for a fool. The worst part wasn't the loss of the money. It was the crushing, suffocating weight of my own stupidity. Telling my children was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Not because I feared their anger, but because I knew what was coming. I invited my son Mark and my daughter, Sarah, over for dinner that Sunday. I made pot roast, Martha's recipe. It was a weak attempt to soften the blow, to wrap the bitter pill of my failure in the comfort of family tradition. I sat them down in the living room, the same room where they'd opened Christmas presents and wrestled on the floor, and I told them everything. I laid out the whole sordid tale, from the first contact with Julian to the disconnected phone number. I tried to be clinical, to present it as a strategic error, a miscalculation, but my voice trembled. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence. It was Sarah who broke it, her voice thick with the one emotion I couldn't bear, pity. "Oh, Dad," she sighed, reaching over to pat my hand as if I were a child who'd fallen off his bike. "You poor thing, how could this happen?" Her kindness was a blade. It was Mark's reaction, however, that truly gutted me. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face a mask of exasperated disbelief. He wasn't looking at a grieving father, he was looking at a faulty asset. A guaranteed return. "Dad, seriously. From a guy you met online," he shook his head, a short, sharp gesture of contempt. "It's a classic pig butchering scam. They fatten you up with small gains and then take you to the slaughter. I read about this stuff all the time. I can't believe you, of all people, fell for it. Of all people." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He saw me not as a victim of a sophisticated psychological operation, but as a doddering old fool who couldn't be trusted with the internet. In that moment, I wasn't their father. I was a problem to be managed. The following week was a blur of humiliation. Mark took it upon himself to handle the situation. He called a family meeting. Not at my house, the home I had owned for 40 years, but at his sleek minimalist condo downtown. A neutral ground, he'd called it, which made it feel anything but. Sarah was there, looking worried and sad. Mark's wife, Christine, was there, offering me a cup of decaf, with a tight, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. They sat me down at my son's glass dining table, and he began a presentation, complete with a folder of printed-out bank statements he'd somehow cajoled me into giving him. He spoke about mitigating the damage and protecting my remaining assets. The subtext was clear, protecting my assets from me. "First things first," Mark announced. "We need to get power of attorney. Both Sarah and I will be on it. It's just a precaution to make sure something like this can't happen again." I felt a cold wave wash over me. Power of attorney. The legal instrument to declare someone incapable of managing their own affairs. They wanted to put a leash on me. Sarah chimed in, her voice gentle. "We were also thinking, Dad, that this house is just too much for you to manage on your own. It's so big. The taxes, the upkeep. Maybe it's time to think about downsizing."
Oh,
"There's a wonderful retirement community over by the lake. It's very secure." Secure. A gilded cage. They weren't just talking about my finances anymore. They were planning the rest of my life, parceling it out into manageable, risk-averse pieces. They were trying to file me away. I looked from Mark's determined, condescending face to Sarah's well-meaning, pitying one, and something inside me began to fracture. This wasn't new, this feeling of being underestimated by them. It had been happening for years.
in 1,000 tiny cuts.
I remembered the Christmas,
Wow.
5 or 6 years ago, when Mark had gotten a big promotion at his tech firm. We were all celebrating, and I tried to share a story about a complex operation I'd run in Berlin back in the 80s. A story about asset management of a very different kind. Mark had laughed, not unkindly, but dismissively. That's great, Dad. Different times, though. You guys were playing check. We're playing 3D chess.
Well,
He'd turned back to his conversation, leaving me standing there, holding my forgotten story like a piece of lint. Then there was the time Sarah had come over to help me set up my new tablet. She'd spoken to me in that slow, loud voice people reserve.
oversee.
The very young or the very old. She'd installed apps to make the font bigger and pre-bookmarked websites for seniors. She meant well, but the assumption was clear. My mind, like my eyesight, was failing. I had let it all slide.
I endured it because they were my children.
I loved them. I thought their condescension was just a clumsy modern form of concern, a generational gap. But sitting at that glass table, listening to them plot the dismantling of my independence, I realized I had been wrong. They didn't see a father who'd made a mistake. They saw a foolish old man, confirming a narrative they had been writing about me for years. The foolish old man who couldn't understand technology. The foolish old man whose past achievements were irrelevant, Cold War relics. The foolish old man who fell for a classic trick. I left Mark's condo that night in a daze. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I just nodded and said I'd think about it. I drove home and walked into my study. The room felt different, violated. This was where I had spoken to Julian, where I had authorized the wire transfers. It was the scene of the crime, my crime, the crime of being too trusting, too lonely, too hopeful. I sank into my old leather chair, the one Martha always said smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, even though I'd never smoked a pipe. On the wall opposite me hung a shadow box containing a piece of paper from a director of Central Intelligence, a medal from a foreign government, whose name I wasn't supposed to mention. They were relics of a different man, a man who moved in a world of shadows and whispers, a man whose entire life was built on analysis, deception, and the ruthless exploitation of an opponent's weakness. And what was I now? A statistic, a mark, a cautionary tale my son would tell his friends over cocktails. The phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Mark. Dad, I'm sending over the power of attorney documents from my lawyer in the morning. Please sign them as soon as you get them. We need to move fast. Reading those words, something inside me didn't just break. It detonated. The grief, the shame, the humiliation, it all burned away in a flash of pure cold rage. A rage so clean and so absolute, it felt like coming home. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to erase me. They saw a liability. A foolish old man. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was never just about the money. It was about respect. The respect the scammer stole, and the respect my own children were trying to bury. I stood up and walked over to the shadow box. I ran my fingers over the cool glass. The man who earned these things wasn't dead. He wasn't senile. He was just dormant. And Julien Dubois, with the help of my loving, condescending children, had just woken him up. It was an unacceptable insult, an operational failure that had to be rectified. Old skills die hard, and my war had just begun. The first step in any operation is to shed your old identity. Philip Norton, the grieving retiree, the foolish old man, had to disappear. In his place, a new asset needed to be created, an asset designed for one purpose, to be the perfect bait. I spent the next 3 days in a state of focused activity I hadn't felt in 20 years. The lethargy and shame were gone, replaced by the familiar humming energy of a mission. My study was no longer a room of failure. It became my command center. I started with a new phone, a prepaid untraceable burner I bought with cash from a corner store miles from my house. Next, a new laptop, also paid for with cash. I set it up at a public library using their guest Wi-Fi network, routed through a high-end VPN service I subscribed to under a fake name, bouncing my signal from Zurich to Singapore to Panama before it ever touched a server in the United States. My digital footprint had to be sterile. The persona I decided on was a work of art, a carefully constructed fiction designed to appeal to every one of a predator's instincts. Her name was Helen Sterling. She was 65, a recent widow from Scottsdale, Arizona. Her late husband, Robert, had been an early investor in a software company, and he'd left her with a considerable and slightly overwhelming inheritance. She was lonely. She was a little naive about money, having let her husband handle everything. But she was smart enough to know she needed to make her money work for her. She was the perfect target, wealthy, vulnerable, and just a little bit lost. Creating Helen wasn't just about writing a backstory, it was about building a life. I spent hours on stock photo websites, searching for the perfect face. Not a model, but someone who looked real. I found her in a series of photos tagged Active Senior Lifestyle. A woman with kind eyes, a gentle smile, and silver hair, pictured walking on a beach, tending to her garden, laughing with friends. I purchased the rights to a dozen of her photos and then, using editing software I hadn't touched in years, I made subtle changes, altering the color of a scarf, blurring a background detail, ensuring they couldn't be reverse image searched. I created an email address for Helen. I built her a social media profile, backdating posts to make it look established. I had her sharing articles about grief counseling, posting photos of her stock photo golden retriever, and joining groups for widows and for luxury travel. Helen Sterling became real. She had a history, a personality, and most importantly, a digital presence that screamed, "I have money, and I don't know what to do with it." While I was building my ghost, I made a call, not to the police, not to the FBI. They would have taken a report, assigned it a case number, and filed it into a mountain of similar cybercrime complaints. My case would have become a statistic, lost in the bureaucratic shuffle. I needed an edge. I needed a friend. David Galloway and I came up together in the agency. We were analysts in the same section, cutting our teeth on Soviet economic intelligence during the last gasps of the Cold War. While I eventually moved into field operations management, David had climbed the ladder on the analytical side. He was now a deputy director at a different, more obscure agency, the kind that officially doesn't exist but has a very real budget. He was my voice of reason, the man who had talked me out of more than one reckless plan in our younger days. I called him on my new clean phone. "Phil, is that you?" "This number is blocked," he answered, his voice still having that same cautious, analytical tone. I told him everything. The scam, the money, Julian. I left out the part about my kids for now. It felt too personal, too raw. I just told him I'd been had. David listened patiently, letting the silence hang after I finished. "Phil, I'm sorry. Truly. But you know the drill. Report it to the Bureau. They have a whole division for this. You're a civilian now. This isn't our world anymore." His response was exactly what I expected. It was the correct, official, by-the-book answer. "David, they took nearly $300,000 from me," I said, my voice low. "The Bureau will take a statement, and I'll get a form letter in 6 months. This guy, he's good.
He's professional.
He has a system. He's not some kid in his mother's basement." I paused, choosing my next words carefully.
I'm not asking for official resources, David.
"Not yet. I'm asking for a friend's advice. I'm going back in. I'm going to bait the hook again. I just need a second set of eyes on the technical data when I get it, to make sure I'm not seeing what I want to see."
There was a long sigh on the other end of the line.
I could picture him perfectly, pinching the bridge of his nose, weighing the... "Philip, this is a terrible idea. This isn't some rogue state actor you're hunting. These are criminals. They could be dangerous."
They've already done their worst.
I lied. The financial hit was bad, but the damage my own family was trying to inflict was far worse. "David, he insulted my intelligence. I can't let that stand. You know me." He did know me. He knew that once I had locked onto a target, I didn't let go. "All right, Phil," he finally conceded, his voice heavy with resignation, "on one condition: you keep me appraised of every single step." The moment this feels like it's he'll plug and we go official. No heroics. You're not in the field anymore. I won't even be leaving my study, I promised. He'll never know I exist, with David as my silent partner, my backstop. The plan felt solid. The final piece was the lure. As Helen Sterling, I began to frequent the same kinds of online forums and social media groups where Julian had first found me. Investment clubs, retirement planning pages, expatriate forums. I didn't post aggressively, I just existed. Helen would ask simple, slightly naive questions. My late husband left me with a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, but the returns are so slow. A friend mentioned something about private equity. It sounds so complicated, or I'm thinking of traveling through Europe next year. Does anyone have experience with long-term currency exchange? I was chumming the water, dropping little pieces of bait into the vast dark ocean of the internet, waiting for the sharks to circle. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of meticulous posting, of building Helen's credibility. And then it happened, a private message on a forum for high-net-worth travelers. It wasn't from Julian. The name was different, but the language, the tone, it was the same smooth, solicitous approach. Hello, Helen, my name is Alex. I couldn't help but notice your question about investments. I work with a small group of private clients, and I might have something that would be of interest to you. It's much more dynamic than simple stocks. Perhaps we could chat sometime. The fish had taken the bait. I looked at the message on my screen, and for the first time in months, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. The hunt was on. Playing the part of Helen Sterling required a level of method acting I hadn't used since my training days. My voice, for instance, had to change. I couldn't speak with my normal cadence. I practiced for hours, softening my tone, raising the pitch just slightly, adding a hesitant, breathy quality. I recorded myself and played it back, critiquing every inflection. When Alex called for the first time, I was ready. I let the phone ring 4 times before answering, as if I were slightly flustered. Hello, I stammered. Helen, this is Alex, from the forum. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. His voice was different from Julian's, a little higher, with a crisp British accent this time. They were smart, using different frontmen, but the script was identical. He was charming, empathetic. He asked about my late husband Robert. I fed him the backstory I'd created, embellishing it with a few well-placed emotional pauses. I was the lonely widow, overwhelmed by her sudden complicated inheritance. He was the kind, capable man, offering a steady hand. The trap was set, and he was walking right into it. As we spoke, my other laptop, my real one, was running. I had call recording software active, capturing every word. Simultaneously, a packet-sniffing program was working to trace the call's origin. As I expected, it was a digital labyrinth. The call was routed through a series of VoIP servers, bouncing from Canada to Germany to the Netherlands. It was professional-grade obfuscation, designed to be untraceable. But nothing is truly untraceable. It just takes time and resources to unravel the thread. We followed the same script Julian had used with me. Alex suggested a small initial investment to build trust, $5,000. I played my part perfectly. Oh my, that's a lot of money, I said, my voice full of nervous hesitation. Oh, I'm just not sure. Robert always handled these things. He was patient, reassuring. He explained it was a fully refundable, no-risk trial. He walked me through setting up a cryptocurrency wallet, explaining it was for speed and security. I knew it was for anonymity, his anonymity. I transferred the $5,000. Just like before, he gave me a login to a slick online portal. And just like before, I watched my $5,000 begin to grow, showing a profit of $400 within a few days. The scam was a well-oiled machine, and I was now a willing cog, gathering intelligence from the inside. We had several more calls over the next 2 weeks. Alex was a master of his craft. He built a rapport, sharing small fabricated personal details. He told me he was from Cambridge, that he'd studied economics, that he loved sailing. Lies, all of it, but effective lies. He was building a character, a friend. All the while, I was building a case file. Every call was recorded and transcribed. Every email was saved. Every data packet from his calls was analyzed. David and I would confer every other night on a secure line. I'd send him the raw data, and he would use the resources at his disposal, resources I no longer had access to dig deeper. The servers they're using are leased through a shell corporation in Cyprus, he told me one night. The crypto wallet is part of a massive tumbling cell based in Eastern Europe. These guys are not amateurs, Phil. They've layered their entire operation. I know, I said, looking at the complex network diagram I had mapped out on a whiteboard in my study. But they have a weakness. What's that? David asked. Greed, I replied, and arrogance. They think they're smarter than everyone. They think they've found another easy mark. It was time to introduce a complication, a new variable, to disrupt their smooth, practiced routine. During our next call, after Alex had spent 20 minutes congratulating me on my savvy initial investment, he made his move. He started talking about a new time-sensitive opportunity, a merger with a German tech firm. He needed a significant capital injection from his private clients. He was talking about $200,000-300,000. I let him finish his pitch, then I sighed dramatically into the phone. Oh, Alex, I said, my voice trembling with manufactured distress. That sounds wonderful, truly. But there's a problem. A problem? Helen, what is it? You can tell me. He sounded so concerned, so sincere. It was sickeningly brilliant. It's my stepson, I said, inventing a new character on the fly. Robert's son from his first marriage.
His name is Richard.
He's the executor of the estate, and he's difficult. He's a lawyer, you see, Odysseus said, very cautious. He has to co-sign on any transfer over $10,000 until the probate is fully settled. I could almost hear the gears turning in Alex's head. This was a deviation from the script. He'd been expecting a simple yes or no, not a legal complication involving a suspicious lawyer stepson. It was a perfect tactic. It was a plausible reason for delay. It allowed me to control the timeline, and it framed me as being on his side, battling against a skeptical third party. A lawyer, Alex repeated, his voice losing a fraction of its warmth. I see. Well, that is a complication. I'm so sorry, I continued, laying it on thick. He just doesn't understand these kinds of modern investments. He thinks everything is a scam. The irony was so rich, I almost choked on it. Alex quickly recovered. No, Helen, don't you worry. That's perfectly understandable. A lawyer has to be cautious. Perhaps I could provide him with some documentation. Our corporate prospectus, our certificate of incorporation, something to put his mind at ease. Bingo, I had him. I had maneuvered him into a position where he had to provide me with something tangible, something that went beyond the ephemeral world of a fake website and a crypto wallet. He was trying to solve a problem, but he was actually walking deeper into my trap. The silent takeover was in motion.
Oh,
He thought he was managing a difficult target. He had no idea he was now my unwitting asset. During one of our subsequent calls, while he was trying to persuade me to talk to my stepson, he let his guard down for a fraction of a second. It's just so frustrating, he said, affecting a sigh. I'm working night and day for my clients. It's pouring rain here in Kuala Lumpur, and I'm stuck in the office at midnight trying to make you money. He caught himself immediately. I mean, it feels like Kuala Lumpur with this workload, he corrected, laughing it off. But it was too late. He had made a mistake, a tiny, insignificant slip of the tongue. Kuala Lumpur. I didn't react. I just continued playing the part of the flustered widow. But as soon as the call ended, I was on the line to David. I have a possible location, I said, my voice tight with excitement. Kuala Lumpur. It was a slip, but it felt real. I'll get to work, David said, cross-referencing the IP packet latency with a probable geographic origin in that region. This might be the break we need, Phil. The scammer's panic was starting to show, and he'd just handed me the first piece of the map that would lead me straight to his door. While I was tightening the net around a criminal enterprise halfway across the world, the siege at home was intensifying. My children's campaign to have me declared incompetent was escalating from a Cold War into a full-blown assault. Mark, in particular, was relentless. He seemed to have appointed himself the CEO of my decline. He would call at odd hours, his tone a mixture of forced patience and simmering frustration. Dad, have you had a chance to look at those power of attorney documents my lawyer sent over? It's been over a week. I'm still reviewing them, Mark, I'd say, my voice calm and non-committal. Reviewing them? Dad, it's a standard document. What's there to review? You just need to sign. He couldn't comprehend that my hesitation wasn't rooted in confusion, but in defiance. One afternoon, he showed up at my house unannounced. He found me in my study, a room now covered in whiteboards filled with network diagrams and timelines. He glanced around, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and alarm. "What is all this?" he asked, gesturing at my work. "It looks like a conspiracy theorist's basement. It's just a project, Mark, a hobby to keep my mind sharp." He wasn't buying it. He'd seen the bill for my new high-speed internet package, a business-class line I needed for the data analysis. He'd seen the charge for the second laptop. He couldn't see the strategy. He could only see the symptoms of what he believed was my unraveling. "A hobby? Dad, are you getting scammed again? Is that what this is? Are you on some forum trying to win your money back? Because that's how they get you a second time. It's called a recovery scam." The condescension was suffocating. He genuinely believed I was a child playing with matches, about to burn the house down. It culminated in a final, ugly confrontation. He and Sarah came over together, a united front. "Dad, we need to talk," Mark began, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "We're worried. You're being secretive. You're spending money on all this equipment. You won't sign the POA. We feel like we have no choice. We've spoken to our lawyer, and he's advised us that if you won't cooperate, we may have to look into a conservatorship. A conservatorship. The legal nuclear option. Stripping me of all autonomy. Placing my life, my finances, my very freedom in their hands. For my own good, of course." That was the moment my heart finally hardened against them. The love was still there, buried deep, but it was now encased in a thick, protective layer of ice. I stood up from my armchair, my movements slow and deliberate. I looked at my son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, now a man threatening to put me in a legal cage. I looked at my daughter, her eyes filled with tears, a willing accomplice in my execution. "Get out," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. Sarah gasped. "Dad," I said. "Get out," I repeated, my voice colder this time. "My finances are my own. My life is my own. This discussion is over. You are not to come back to this house or contact me again until you are prepared to treat me as your father, not as your patient." Mark's face flushed with anger. "Fine, Dad. Fine. Be that way. But don't you come crying to me when you're completely broke and you've lost the house. Don't call me for anything." They left, slamming the door behind them. The house fell silent. It was a different kind of silence this time. Not the lonely silence of grief, but the clean, cold silence of liberation. They had made their move. They had cut me off, believing it was their ultimate punishment. In reality, they had given me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to operate without their suffocating concern. The family exodus was complete. I was truly alone, and I had never been more powerful. With the domestic front now quiet, I could focus all my energy on the international one. My gambit with the lawyer's stepson was paying off beautifully. Alex the scammer was getting desperate. The $500,000 whale he thought he'd hooked was proving to be incredibly difficult to land. His greed was warring with his caution. He was now emotionally and temporally invested in the con. He couldn't afford to just walk away. It was time for me to force his hand, to make him take a physical risk. I staged an emotional breakdown over the phone. I called him, my voice a frantic sobbing mess. "Alex, it's awful. Richard, my stepson, he found the website. He says it's a fraud. He's threatening to go to the authorities, to get a court order to freeze all of Robert's accounts. He called your company a phantom corporation. I was acting for an audience of one, and I gave the performance of a lifetime. I was a terrified, hysterical widow, caught between a rock and a hard place. Alex's voice was tight with panic. Helen, calm down, please. He's wrong. He's just a provincial lawyer. He doesn't understand international finance. Our company is completely legitimate. He wants proof, I wailed. He wants to see official corporate documents, something notarized. He says anything on a computer can be faked. He wants to see paper. I had pushed him into a corner. His digital camouflage was no longer enough. To keep the con alive, to have any hope of landing that massive payday, he had to cross the barrier from the virtual to the physical world. He had to produce something real. There was a long pause on his end. I could hear the muffled sound of him talking to someone else in the room. He was consulting with his superior. The man who was likely the real Julien Dubois. When he came back on the line, his voice was strained but decisive. All right, Helen. All right. To put your mind, and your stepson's, at ease, I will do something we never do. I will send you our official corporate registration packet via international courier. It contains our certificate of incorporation from the Swiss registry, and our articles of association. These are notarized, legal documents. Will that satisfy him? My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. Yes, I think so, I whispered, sounding hopeful. Where should I have them sent? He asked. I gave him a P.O. box I had rented under another false name in a different city. And Alex, I added, my voice full of feigned gratitude. For my records, could you give me the return address, just in case there's an issue with the delivery? He hesitated for only a second. His greed had won. Of course, Helen, of course. He then read out an address, an office number in an industrial park, on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur. It was a dispatch center, he explained, for their Asian Pacific administrative hub. I wrote it down, my hand steady. I felt a grim, icy satisfaction settle over me. He had just handed me his head on a platter. As soon as I hung up the phone, I called David. I have him, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. He's sending a package. I have a physical address. The final phase of the operation moved with a speed and efficiency that felt like coming home. David took the address and the name of the courier through his official channels. He liaised with the Royal Malaysia Police. It wasn't a request from a random American citizen. It was a formal intelligence sharing request from a U.S. government agency that got their attention. Within 24 hours, they had the industrial park under surveillance. The address was a small, nondescript office space on the third floor of a drab concrete building. It was a boiler room. They identified at least a dozen individuals working there, making calls day and night. The package for Helen Sterling was picked up by the courier on a Wednesday. The Malaysian police had a man inside the courier company. They confirmed the package's contents, and more importantly, the sender's details. It was all linked back to that office. My job was simple, but crucial. I had to keep the primary target, the man I knew as Alex, on the phone at the precise moment of the raid. I had to ensure he was in that office when the doors came down. I arranged one final call with him for the following day, under the pretext of having him walk me through the final authorization for the $500,000 transfer now that I had convinced my stepson. The call was scheduled for 10 a.m. my time, which would be 10 p.m. in Kuala Lumpur, prime time for their operation. David and I coordinated with the Malaysian team leader on a secure conference line. The raid was greenlit. At exactly 9:58 a.m. my burner phone rang. It was Alex. He sounded triumphant, energized. The finish line was in sight.
Helen, my friend,
Are you ready to secure your financial future?
he asked.
His voice dripping with false sincerity. I am, Alex, I replied, keeping my voice in the Helen character. I could hear the faint chatter of other voices in the background. He was in the boiler room. The team was in position. I followed his instructions, pretending to navigate my online banking portal. He was walking me through the steps of the international wire transfer. My own money, coming back to me, in the most beautifully ironic way possible. The Malaysian team leader's voice came through my earpiece, a calm whisper. We are moving in. Keep him on the line. I could hear the distant faint sound of commotion through Alex's phone. A door being breached. Shouts in Malay. Alex's chill patter faltered. Helen, hold on a moment. There's some noise outside. Is everything all right, Alex? I asked, a hint of steel entering my voice. The shouting grew louder. Panic started to creep into his tone. I'm not sure. I think I have to go. I don't think you're going anywhere, I said. I dropped the Helen persona completely. My voice returned to its normal register, cold and clear. Tell me, Alex, or should I say Julian, is the weather nice in Kuala Lumpur today? There was a sudden sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Complete silence. He knew. I imagine it's about to get a little hectic for you, I continued, savoring every word. You know, for a man who claims to be in Cambridge, your voice data packets have been taking a very specific, very traceable route through a server farm in Cyberjaya. You should have invested in a better VPN. I heard a loud crash through his phone, then a clear shout in English. Police! Hands in the air. On the floor now. Alex let out a choked, terrified gasp. Hugh! Who's this? He stammered. This is Philip Norton, I said calmly. Oh, the foolish old man you and your crew swindled out of $280,000. You didn't just target a retiree, you little punk. You targeted a man who spent 30 years hunting people just like you for a living. You thought you were butchering a pig, but you messed with a spook. I could hear he forced to the ground, the clink of handcuffs. Enjoy your new retirement plan, I said. I hear the food in a Malaysian prison is terrible. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair. A profound quiet filled my study. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of victory. A few weeks later the story broke. Interpol, in conjunction with Malaysian authorities, announced the dismantling of a massive international cybercrime ring responsible for defrauding victims of an estimated $50 million. They had rolled up the entire Kuala Lumpur operation, and using the data seized from their servers, were making arrests across Europe. A spokesperson for Interpol gave a press conference, praising the invaluable and highly sophisticated intelligence provided by a private American citizen, a former U.S. counterintelligence officer, whose personal experience with the criminals was instrumental in bringing down their network. They didn't use my name, but they didn't have to. Mark called me that evening. There was a long, awkward silence after Dad? He finally said, his voice small, tentative. We saw the news about that scam ring. He saw that too, I replied evenly. The official they quoted, the former counterintelligence officer. Dad, was that you? I let the silence stretch out, a vast canyon of everything he had assumed, everything he had believed about me. The foolish old man, the incompetent father, the liability. I handled it, Mark, I said simply. There was nothing else to say. I heard him take a shaky breath. It was the sound of a worldview collapsing. The sound of my son realizing, for the first time in his adult life, that he had no idea who his father really was. There was no more talk of power of attorney. There were no more condescending suggestions about my welfare. When he and Sarah finally did visit again, weeks later, there was an unfamiliar emotion in their eyes. Oh, and a healthy overdue dose of fear. The power dynamic in our family had been permanently and seismically rearranged. I had won the war on two fronts, so, here I am, back in my study. The whiteboards have been wiped clean. The burner phone and extra laptop have been destroyed. The house is quiet again, but it's a comfortable silence now. Did I get all my money back? No. The authorities were able to recover and seize a significant portion of the ring's assets, and as a documented victim, I'll eventually get about 60 cents on the dollar. But it was never really about the money, was it? It was about a much more valuable currency, dignity. My children look at me differently now. The pity is gone, replaced by a wary respect. Our relationship is strange, and perhaps it will be for a long time. It's been rebuilt on a new foundation, one that I had to force them to acknowledge. They see me now, not just the old man they thought I was. They see the person I've always been. They saw an old man, then assumed the book was closed. They thought they knew how the story ended.
But they forgot that a long book has many chapters, and some of the most interesting ones are often tucked away in the back. They underestimated me. The scammer did, and my own family did.
Fact, they saw age and assumed it meant weakness. They forgot that with age comes experience. Sometimes that experience is in balancing a checkbook, and sometimes it's in hunting men in the dark. My advice to you is this: never let anyone write your final chapter for you. Never let them tell you who you are or what you're capable of.
The world is full of people who will try to put you in a box, to label you as too old, too naive, too late. Don't you ever believe them. Your story is yours to write, right up until the very last word.